Good morning, everyone. I'm Jakob Bangsgaard. I'm the CEO of Urtico, and I'm going to chair the innovation talk that we have this morning. I hope you are fresh, that the tequila doesn't have too strong an impact on you this morning, but it was a great evening yesterday, and I hope that we're also going to have a great day today, and especially this morning with the innovation talk, where we're going to discuss innovations both for passenger and freight transport. We have a great lineup of speakers for you. We have 3 presentations and 4 presenters, so we have 1 joint presentation. And we are going to have questions after the presentations, and then we're going at the end to take questions to the panel. So I'm sure that you all have heard that the mobility sector is going through disruption, and due to the many innovations coming to market and changes in consumer behavior and so on. So a disruption that has hit so many other markets before, and we often hear that in the coming 10 years we will see more changes to the mobility sector than we've seen for the past 100 years. And this is partly due to some of the innovations that our speakers are dealing with, and that's why it will be very interesting to hear from them on where we are in this development. So I will now welcome the joint presentation. That is Stefan Maurer. He is Head of Future Transportation at Mercedes-Benz Vans. And Oliver Evans, he is Global Head of Business Development at Matternet. Please, Oliver and Stefan.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for this nice introduction. Stefan Maurer, my name. I'm heading this group with the name Future Transportation from Mercedes-Benz Vans. Mercedes-Benz Vans is a Daimler division, and my group, which is fairly new, fast growing. We're heading into 150 people, which are dealing with the subjects we're going to explain you. Yeah, the group is set up to explore innovations beyond the core business of Mercedes-Benz Vans. And Mercedes-Benz Vans is in the Sprinter business, in the Vito business, in the V-Class business. And you might have heard all of these products. We are going beyond that. And the mission is to do innovations in the technical field as well as exploring the fields of business innovations. And you will learn how Matternet and Mercedes-Benz Vans team up to explore exactly that in one very, very interesting application. So to start, when you look at the megatrends, and I think most of you have seen such a slide more or less before, but we need to start here at that point. It's the growing urbanization, the growing population in urban cities, and this is not only something happening in the developing countries, it's also happening here in Europe, it's happening in North America and in Asia especially. And there what you see is that the population, especially in the metropolitan areas, have really a growing demand on e-commerce goods. They order their stuff online. It's not only about books anymore, it's about food, it's about virtually everything. And I don't know how it is with you in your private life, but when I look at my private life, hardly any day passes without a package being delivered to our doorstep. And luckily for us, as Mercedes-Benz Vans, most of these packages are being delivered by vans. But still, this on-demand economy is really, really growing rapidly. And we think we need to provide more than just a van for this. And you will learn about this in a minute.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm indeed delighted that it is ladies and gentlemen, many ladies in the audience. I think the future of the industry is bright if we're attracting talent from all segments of our society in the future and, of course, in the present. I'm working for a company called Matternet. We're a 6-year-old Silicon Valley startup, and our mission is to make access to goods as easy and as universal as access to information has become, thanks to our smartphones and similar devices that we use today. We don't need to go to libraries. We don't need to go to travel agents to get the information that we need. We have it at our fingertips all the time, on time, And we believe that the future of access to goods will be and should be similar. We should be able to access goods, order them via the internet, and expect them on demand. Now, how should that happen? One of the ironies of logistics is the comparison between long-haul transportation and short-haul. I've been in logistics throughout my career, working for airlines, for shipping companies, and now, of course, for Metanet. And the irony is that the transportation is most reliable over the longest distances. You can consolidate freight, you can bring it together, you can standardize the packaging, containerize, and then transport from one airport at one end of the world to the other. You can travel from one railway station to another, you can travel from one port to another, extremely reliably and very cost effectively per kilometer of transportation. And in the last mile, this is where the challenges arise. We have congestion, we have pollution, we have all kinds of constraints that make that last mile transportation unreliable, difficult, and this, of course, presents tremendous challenges to all kinds of different industries. And we believe that we have one of the answers. We need to find new solutions and a paradigm with using drones, but drones also in combination with other forms of transportation that will make this transformation possible.
Okay, the way we look at it is that our vans are a device for the transportation of goods as well as for the transportation of people. And drones, quadrocopters, as Metanet are developing, they are nothing else. They are devices for the transportation of goods. They can be used for that. And what we thought is, why not combining both worlds and forming a lot more synergy coming from the combination of drones and vans, and you will learn about this in this talk this morning. What we did as Mercedes-Benz Vans, we did a strategic investment into Metanet, which was released last year. We go into joint development of complete and holistic solutions for our common customers when it comes to the transportation of goods in the combination of drones and vans. And of course, we are evaluating even more cooperation in that field. And what you see here is one example, and you learn about this in a minute in a short video we provided, where some goods are being delivered to the van by a drone. And the other thing is, this is our vision van. You will learn about this at the very end of our talk, where some parcels are being delivered from the van to the customer, to his house by drones. So let's start with that short little video and this example.
We started the project Vans and Drones because MB Vans is constantly exploring into new fields of business and technologies to offer the best value for our customer. With Metanet, we have found an innovative and experienced partner, and with combining our assets and their assets, we see a lot of potential for future applications.
Well, in most cities today, there is severe traffic. There is a certain windows of time when it's almost impossible to get between places easily. That means very high cost and very much time spent on the road.
Vans and Drones is an integrated delivery service, and it starts with a mobile application which can be used to order items directly at the construction site. When the order is placed, it will be dispatched from a retail store directly via a drone, and the drone is then traveling from the retail store to our Mercedes-Benz van.
Through this partnership with Mercedes-Benz, we integrated technology in the roof of the van to create a safe landing zone on the van roof. The drone automatically is routed to that location. It then senses a beacon in the roof of the van and lands on it safely in a fully autonomous way.
When the drone is in its final approach to the van, the customer has to confirm with its mobile application that it's safe to land, and when he gave the confirmation, the drone lands on rooftop, drops the item onto the roof and launches back again to the retailer, and the customer can retrieve the ordered items directly from the rooftop of our van.
I believe that drones will enable a new way to access goods every day. We will be able to access goods on demand and be able to receive them very fast, very cheaply, at the location of our choice. In Mercedes-Benz, we found a partner that is not only synonymous with quality, safety, reliability, efficiency, but also a partner that is willing to imagine and create the future with us.
Mercedes-Benz, vans born to run.
So where are we coming from? Once again, our company started in 2011. We've been collaborating with organizations like the World Health Organization, Doctors Without Borders, UNICEF, executing missions in a number of countries all around the world, in Bhutan, in the Dominican Republic, in Papua New Guinea, in Africa in 2015. So we've been working on proving that this technology is ready for deployment at scale. We started the collaboration with Daimler in 2015 also, and revealed the van that you'll hear more about in a moment in September last year. In 2015, we were able to do a deployment in Switzerland, executing a number of flights beyond line of sight, as we call it, so 10 kilometers across the Swiss countryside, fully reliably on behalf of Swiss Post. And this led to a collaboration this year, which again you will hear more about in a moment, where we were able to do a pilot in Switzerland for the first time in an urban environment, transporting medical samples between two hospitals. The technology is available. Our vehicles can transport up to 2 kilos over distances of up to 20 kilometers, fully reliably, and in the case of Lugano, we did some 90 flights over the city, as you will see shortly. We're now getting ready to do a similar pilot for the technology that we are showcasing in this room today, which is van and drone, and we're in advanced preparations for a pilot that will be in Europe during the course of this year. To give you more insights into what happened in Lugano, we also have a short video. We collaborated with Swiss Post, the National Postal Organization of Switzerland, and a local hospital company in Lugano that runs several facilities throughout the canton. They have laboratories in each of the hospitals, and of course, with personalized medicine, with more and more advanced medicine, they need to specialize the laboratories for certain functions. And today they're transporting samples, diagnostic samples, blood samples, between the two facilities using taxis, and of course taxis have to maneuver through the city center, are subject to the congestion that there is in the city center, even in a small town like Lugano. And here you see a different solution. Direct flights just beyond a kilometer, transporting those samples reliably from location to location.
So it doesn't stop there. When you look at this application, what you see with this, or what you saw with this craftsman ordering a cutting blade for his tool, which was broken, I think it's very, very obvious that this will make a business case, that it's really, really cheaper to have him on the countryside do some other work, whereas in nowadays he would have to drive to a, let's say, DIY store, let's say 20 minutes drive, 20 minutes shopping in the DIY store, 20 minutes drive back, an hour is gone. And you might have experienced that in your private life as well, when a craftsman enters your house and does some repair work, that he sometimes needs to leave because something is missing. In this case here, we provide a solution where the goods can be ordered directly via an e-commerce channel and being delivered to the van in a very safe manner. And goods are now delivered on the spot to the right time at the right place. It's not only about service technicians and craftsmen, as in the video you saw. It can also be medicine, as in the example of Lugano, where, let's say, some vital medicine can be transported to an ambulance, which is already on the spot where an accident occurred. Or think about roadside assistance. Yeah, when you have someone repairing a truck at the roadside which broke down, and a special part is needed, depending on the size and the weight, of course. Yeah, this could be transported right to the spot via a drone to the repair van. And there are many, many more applications we see, and this is why we don't think it's only a niche market. This will come, and we are ready. We, Matternet and Mercedes-Benz Vans, we developed this technology, and we are ready to pilot it in the field in the course of 2017. And yeah, this is the rear view of our Vision Van, which we have here in the glass hall. There will be a demonstration, I think, right after this panel, so don't miss that out, to go to the glass hall and look at this Vision Van, this show car we have on display there. The technology is there, the customer value is there, customer value for, let's say, this service technician, this craftsman you've seen in the video, but also for the retailers. They can offer completely new distribution channels to their customers. They can offer other service levels to their customers. The goods are being delivered at the right time, at the minute someone asks for. So if you ask for delivery, let's say at 10 o'clock sharp Saturday morning, it'll be there at 10 o'clock sharp on a Saturday morning. This could otherwise only be done by a courier, which is much more costly than this combination of drones and the van. So there's a lot of business potential in it and a lot of market potential in it, and we believe in this, and this is why we invested in Matternet and why we teamed up with Matternet, and you will hear about us, about what we are doing in 2017 more.
So we have the technology is evolving very fast, of course, but the technology is already able to execute these missions today. The market, Stefan has just talked about, of course, we also need a regulatory framework for this to happen. Now, one of the great good fortunes is that these vehicles that we're flying, these drones that we're flying, of course, are a very sophisticated piece of machinery. It's not like the hobby drones that you can buy for a few $100s in a local shop. You may fly it within line of sight only, but anybody can fly them, unfortunately, because some people do some pretty strange and stupid things with them. But our vehicles are professional tools. We want them to solve real problems in logistics around the world. And we need a regulatory framework which makes it safe for us to operate these vehicles and to organize the traffic. Unfortunately, that framework is now evolving very, very rapidly. Once again, in Switzerland, we were able to start a collaboration with the Swiss Civil Aviation Authority that enabled us to do a number of flights beyond line of sight in 2015. Our vehicle, which we called at that time Matternet 1, was certified by the Civil Aviation Authority, carrying a registration number just as an aircraft, a manned aircraft, has a registration number, and we had approval for the flights that we executed. We were able to get the approval for flights across a city, as you saw in the video that I shared with you a short while ago. And now the Swiss Civil Aviation Authority representatives are heading up a working group, a JARIS working group as they call it, with other civil aviation authorities from around the world, looking to establish global standards for the certification of vehicles, for the risk assessment of the missions that are to be performed, and therefore for the approval of those routes that will be carrying all kinds of goods as described by Stefan. This process is well underway, and we think it's extremely important. Once again, there is risk with any type of technology, but none of us even give a second thought to the aircraft flying overhead over our cities every day, because we know that there is a tremendous track record of safety and reliability with the airline industry. And it is exactly the same standards which we're seeking to achieve, and it is the same civil aviation authorities that are responsible for creating that framework for us.
Okay, this is a video of our Vision Van, the van displayed in the glass hall. It's a holistic system, and you will learn that it can really have quantum leaps in efficiency when it comes to parcel distribution on the last mile. On one hand, because of the parallelization of processes, drones are bringing out parcels, as well as the man, the courier, is bringing out parcels, but also because We do have a kind of a one-shot loading system. We do have some automation within the cargo space of the van. No sorting, no searching necessary anymore. Have a look at it, and we have it on display. It's real. The van is there in the glass hall.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've had a glimpse into the present, you've had a glimpse into the future. And we believe that the technology that we're developing together will be addressing problems that will facilitate trade. Facilitate trade means also enhancing business opportunities in any country around the world. This is a way of creating a framework that will enhance the national competitiveness of any economy. These types of tools making our cities of the future not only livable but functional. And this is why we're addressing this audience and have great pleasure in being here today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver and Stefan. I think you really gave us a good start to the discussions about innovation, and I've seen this coming to market as prototypes in some years back, and I think we are now moving very close to realization, and it's great to see the kind of pace that this is moving with, as we have to solve some of the problems in the mobility sector, as you mentioned. So we will take a few questions. Yes, please. I think there will be a microphone coming.
Thank you. I kind of understand the delivering product by drones, but I'm just wondering where the vans from your company actually fits into this whole story. The video shows that the drone actually delivers this box on the top of the vans, but the another video shows that your drone also pick up and deliver the medical the product on the ground. So why the vans actually are sort of the part of this integration for the future this delivery model? Thanks.
Great question. Thank you. You just perfectly described two concepts we are pursuing. One, internally we call it the sky bridge thing. This is what you saw with the Craftsman, where the drone is delivering a good to the van, and you need the van to have a secure place. There is technology in the roof of the van to maintain the clearance of the area above the van. There are some triangulation devices so that the drone can really securely land on top of the roof of the van. So this is the sky bridge concept, and another one, this with the last video we showed, and with the Vision van here on display in the glass hall. There, it's something we call a sky shuttle, where your drone, your goods to be delivered, are dispatched from the van, and they're going now to the end customer, and they can now land either on a device we designed together with Matternet, which stands in your backyard or in your front yard, or there might be other means of secure landing, and there is where your parcel is being handed over. So two concepts, and in both concepts you need the van. In the last concept, these automated systems, they hand over the parcel to be delivered to the drones on the roof of the van.
Okay, I think we will have to continue to the next speaker, and then we will take the questions at the end in the panel. So thank you very much once again for your presentation.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Kevin Webb. He's the co-founder of Open Transport Partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to talk a bit about modernizing transport data and the work that we're doing with Open Transport Partnership. This is actually work that's actually started at the World Bank and is a collaboration with a bunch of multilateral groups thinking about kind of what the future of data is in the transport sector. And this actually fits really closely with the questions I think that are being asked here this week about governance and the kind of ways that we think about the way that data and kind of governance intersect in transport. I want to start out, we talk a lot about transportation technologies and kind of technology in general right now in the consumer world as being platforms, kind of being these technology platforms. And I want to start out with the kind of premise that cities are actually the first platform technology, and that for quite a long time, for thousands of years now, we've been innovating on kind of the development of technological infrastructure that we can kind of build society on top of. And that's really been physical infrastructure for most of this history. This is a picture of a cross-section of a street in Berlin in the 1890s, just showing the kind of just incredible amount of innovation that was occurring and kind of building the kind of physical infrastructure that makes a city possible. There's everything from telecommunications and power and sanitation to transport and thinking about the kind of ways that we move people and goods around. All of these are kind of platforms that we built into cities to enable people to live in kind of close proximity to each other in a way that was efficient and kind of minimize the downsides. And really, cities were about kind of helping that, reduce that friction and make that possible for people to actually live in coordination. And this technology played a really fundamental role in that. And this infrastructure that we've been building, and this is particularly true in transportation, is really fundamentally about coordination. It's about coordinating how people share a confined space, how they maximize the benefit of that, how they minimize the downsides. But we're in a moment right now where I think this is quite clear to everyone here, that we're moving from primarily physical forms of coordination to informational coordination. And this is just a screenshot of Waze and showing in LA kind of the way that we're now kind of collaboratively understanding this and sharing information with each other as a way to utilize already existing physical infrastructure and physical spaces. So I've spent most of my career working on this in the kind of open data world, thinking about how we actually make that data that drives informational coordination available to people. And I think that one of the really interesting parts of this story that we should go back to and understand is that back in 2007, this is a group of folks that got together kind of under the title of the Open Government Working Group to kind of sit down and define what does it mean to kind of take this idea of the city as a platform or kind of a community as a platform, set of technologies that we're all building on top of, and bring that into the world that's being created by the internet. And what they did is they created a set of principles that kind of guided what we've called the open data movement or the open government data movement for the last decade. And these principles define the way that we think about this informational layer as being available to people to build on top of and to build communities that work to kind of maximize the benefits and kind of ensure that people are brought into this digital world. And I don't think there's any sector that's benefited more from this than transport. I've spent most of the last 10 years kind of working in that world on the transport side. And there's just incredible examples of how this has changed the lives of literally billions of people. One of the ones that I've worked on quite a bit is this idea about GTFS, or the General Transit Feed Specification, which lets people around the world know about public transit. There's also data in OpenStreetMap that's millions of people collaborating to build just an incredibly rich map of the physical world and the kind of way that city infrastructure is managed. This is a picture of Leipzig from the OpenStreetMap that's built entirely by volunteer kind of collaborative effort. So there's really just a tremendous amount of data and kind of potential that's come out of this open data movement. But the thing I want to bring up here and kind of talk about going forward in the work that we're doing is that after a decade of trying to realize this potential, we're really at a moment, we're at a crossroads moment in thinking about this. And I want to talk a little bit about why, what's actually been occurring over this period of time that maybe caught many of us by surprise or kind of slowly creeped up on us. First of all, it's worth recognizing that there are two kinds of open data. And that there's top-down data. This is a kind of the data like GTFS, things that government produces and shares with us to kind of understand how the world works physically, the kind of services that we provide as civil society, and the data that's about those services. There's also bottom-up data that's produced by citizens. And this is the data like OpenStreetMap, which is entirely a collaborative representation that people got together on their own and figured out ways to map the world and make sense of it and share that information with each other. the open data movement and particularly the world, open government world that relates to open data, I think we really underestimated the power of bottom-up data. I think that a lot of the work that I've been involved in, and many of the folks I think in this community in the transport sector have been involved in, focused on top-down. And I think what really has been amazing, and it's actually a really extraordinary outcome, is the real power of the bottom-up that's occurred as a result of digital connected, kind of citizens with mobile phones and tremendous ability to kind of aggregate our understanding of the world in real time. We've really seen the true revolutions in the transport sector, and many of the things that are coming forward out of technology in general is coming from the bottom-up side of this, and this is in many ways a surprise. The other thing that I think that has been interesting in the kind of open government world is not really appreciating the role of private sector innovators in driving this, and I think that nowhere has this been more true in the kind of like what's happened the last 10 years around the smart cities movement and the kind of thinking about the role that private sector has to contribute and wants to contribute to shaping the kind of digital infrastructure, technical infrastructure that underpins civil society. There's just a tremendous amount of work that's gone on to try to bring work from the private sector in and help government really reimagine itself. But as part of this, one of the things that's occurred, and this is something I think is not well understood by many of the people I've worked with in the public sector, is a shift from private sector innovators, from vendors and kind of people who are selling services to government to enable public sector to do its work, to a vertical integrator who's working really from a consumer-oriented perspective and building platforms that consumers are benefiting from that provide the services that actually in some ways compete with what government was doing before. And we see this tension starting to occur with Uber. This is something that's played out quite a bit in the US and in many other parts of the world where there's this kind of question about really who's in control of this future that's emerging. And this is something that what's occurring in this is we're realizing the potential of bottom-up data, but we're increasingly doing it through closed platforms that are not really part of the kind of traditional discourse around the public realm. And one of the other things that's happened in this is that data is actually becoming increasingly a competitive advantage rather than an open platform we can build on top of. And many of the companies that are entering this from a kind of a vertical integration standpoint or doing it entirely through private enterprise are seeing the data that they collect, the kind of bottom-up data they collect is actually a barrier to entry for their competitors. So the question we're asking right now, and this is where the work I'm doing with Open Transport Partnership is really looking at is what does this mean and how do we think about this and what it means to the street, kind of the transportation layers that we build in cities as open platforms going forward. If we've kind of realized the potential of this, but kind of have some open questions now about how this actually will play out in the kind of intersection around public and private control and the way that we think about the governance of these systems. So what we've realized is that we need new ways of thinking about data. The kind of traditional definitions, the ones that we came up with in 2007 around the kind of original framing of the open data movement, weren't really quite complete solutions to this problem. We need to step back and we need to think about what's a more complete set of these options look like, or these kind of ways of thinking about data look like. There's two challenges that are really quite critical that I don't think we've fully incorporated into this, especially not in the open data conversation. And the first one of these is privacy. The reality is that the bottom-up data that we're collecting is just enormous potential, but it's also really at odds with the idea of the kind of openness that we kind of embedded into the kind of open data movement. And the reason why is that it's about us as individuals. And this is a map of my life in DC, or Washington, DC, where I live. This is a data that's collected just passively as a user of Google Maps. My phone tracks my movement over the course of the day. Not only tracks my movement, it tracks where I went to and what I was doing there. It knows I went to the gym. It knows I went to the World Bank for a meeting. It knows that I rode my bicycle in the morning. It knows that I took the train home in the evening. So not only the activities, but the modes and the kind of times of this. And this is data that's just passively collected as part of just having the phone in my pocket and using Google Maps. On one hand, this is enormously just powerful data. This completely transforms the way we think about transportation planning, the way we think about operational questions in kind of transport world. But it also brings up enormous questions about sharing this data. This is data that is beneficial to everyone to understand and aggregate and to understand how to use. It's incredibly sensitive for me personally for this to become part of an open data kind of conversation. How do we make that jump? So addressing the kind of privacy concerns, the tension between me as an individual contributor to this understanding and me as a private citizen. The second is really about accountability, and it's about the fact that we're now creating this data through private platforms and through consumer services where companies are generating this data as part of their business. And increasingly that generation, that process of collecting and generating data is at odds with some of the questions we're asking from a governance side. And again, we've seen examples of this come up, and I'm going to use Uber again, and I actually don't want to give the, the kind of sense that I'm doing this beat up on Uber, actually, I think it's actually a really interesting example that's happened in the last several months. We've kind of got to watch what Uber's encountered as it's gone through these questions about governance and data. And actually, this is not a surprise at all. This is something that other industries, that not just transport, other industries that are more mature and kind of thinking about data, have been dealing with for decades. If you look at the consumer finance world, there's just a long history of understanding that you've got entities that are producing data about the industry that also play a role from a regulatory standpoint, and how you manage that kind of intersection between governance and the kind of idea of the data as a producer and the data as something that is an input to a regulatory process is incredibly complicated, and we have to come up with more thoughtful ways to do it. Transport sector is just very early in that process. Uber is very early in that process as a company, and we kind of see this collision that's occurred over the last couple of years as we've tried to work that out. The question is, what do we do in response to that, and where do we go back to thinking about what our options are? And I want to return to this idea of the kind of city as a piece of infrastructure and the kind of ideas of the way we built technology in cities around the concept of utilities. I think that there's actually a long history of kind of thinking about how we build technical infrastructure and kind of platforms that are really critical to everyone to have access to, but also quite complex to operate and involve many different public and private actors in actually running them. And we've been doing this for a long time already in other layers of technology. They've just been primarily physical. The question now is, can we bring some of that thinking about the way we've thought about, kind of the way we manage physical infrastructure, technical infrastructure, like what we see in this, kind of 1890s version of incredibly high-tech things around transport and sanitation and power, and bring that to where we are today with the kind of data layers that were now increasingly critical to operating modern transport systems. So the question is, are there ways that we can start to think about building data utilities, or in this case, transport data utilities, that actually allow us to integrate the public and private in a way that addresses some of these questions about privacy, addresses some of these questions about accountability. And this is actually the work that we're doing with the Open Transport Partnership, is thinking about that intersection between the public and private and how we build a hybrid space where this can happen. And this is actually, as I mentioned, this began at the World Bank. It's been something that's been being explored with colleagues there for a number of years, and kind of thinking about the way that private data for sensitive, highly sensitive data from private industry can be brought to bear. It's actually expanded, working with NACTO and the World Resource Institute. This week, we're also excited to have ITF involved as a formal member in this work going forward, to think about how we can actually start to navigate these at a global scale in many different geographies. And the work that we're doing really fundamentally focuses on public-private partnerships and kind of thinking about the kind of transparency of those public-private partnerships around data. And what we're creating is tools, data standards, and then really critically infrastructure to help anonymize and aggregate and make that data relevant to different consumers. And what we think is really quite innovative about this is the sense that there's a third party involved, that we're not actually just relying on the producer of the data to make the data available in a form that's beneficial to the downstream users, but that there's actually a negotiation that has to occur in between the different stakeholders and the people producing this data. And we've actually started this around traffic data. This is the work that's been going on at the World Bank for a number of years, where we've actually been collecting real-time roadway speed data using GPS from millions of vehicles and increasingly wide geography of companies that are involved in actually producing this. These are private fleets that have vehicles driving around cities, generating just a constant stream of information about where those vehicles are and the conditions they're encountering on the road. And we're building infrastructure that enables those companies to then make that data available in an anonymized aggregate form that doesn't undermine the privacy concerns of their individual customers, it doesn't undermine, really quite critically, the business concerns that these companies have as competitors in a really contentious market for transportation services, but still allows public sector users and others to understand what they're encountering, how this data is actually can be used as an input to transport planning. So we're already working on this in Southeast Asia, where the project began with Grab. We've expanded it in Latin America. We're currently exploring partnerships in other regions right now. So this is something that has been ramped up over the last year and a half now, and in the coming year, we expect to have fairly significant coverage around the globe. One of the things we've realized in doing this, and we've started to build out the Open Transport Partnership that's actually incubating this, is that cities actually need data infrastructure to manage a whole new set of questions, not just traffic, but the way that we are increasingly changing the way we use streets. They actually need data infrastructure to support this sort of intersection about streets. And so what we're imagining our work now, kind of looking ahead beyond traffic, we're thinking about this in a more holistic way. How do we start to build a more comprehensive view of the street that allows these public and private entities to start to come together? And then we start really with street data and the kind of underlying infrastructure on the street. And what we've encountered as we work with the public sector is that they're increasingly trying to find ways to talk about the street in a digital way that can connect a whole variety of stakeholders together. This is everything from roadway pricing and the desire to communicate about kind of tolling and congestion charges to dynamic regulations, or quite commonly about parking and the kind of ways that we use the curb space in cities. They actually need to talk about this digital layer in a way to actually imagine the policy and governance structures that they have for the future of streets, and that we actually need to develop this sort of language to enable those sort of conversations to happen between public and private kind of regulators and users of the street space. It turns out that the infrastructure that we built for the Open Traffic project that kind of described the street was a useful starting point for that. And one of the things we're stepping back to look at now is, are there ways we can turn that description of the street, that kind of underlying digital representation, into something that we can start to use to bring different public and private data sources together around a common understanding or common description of what that street is and the way it's actually being used. The second level of this, and this is something that we're hoping to get into probably in the next year, this is a much more complex thing from a privacy standpoint, is thinking not just about the street, but the actual transport demand and trip level data that's occurring at kind of the operational layer of kind of how people are getting between places. And this is something that we see kind of coming into this overall kind of utility environment, and something we want to try to understand how we can help facilitate the sharing of this really sensitive layer of data that's actually quite critical to a whole bunch of different users. And then finally, what comes out of this and then what actually gets shared is this kind of anonymized or aggregate view, not the actual individual inputs, but the kind of interpreted view of this, and finding ways that we can present that in a way that's both transparent about how it's produced and accessible to different users. So going forward, and this is our next several months of this, we're actually looking at the ways that we can start to use that description of the street to connect data about safety, curb management, and increasingly multimodal information about different transport operators, both public and private, everything from mass transit to kind of shared mobility, how we can start to use this common representation of the street to connect those data layers together. One of the things that we're recognizing in actually doing this work, and this is actually quite critical to how we operate, is that these sort of partnerships have to generate value for both the public and the private users. They can't just be something where you're coming in and compelling someone to share something against their will. There's actually an opportunity to kind of look at this as something of mutual value, and how we can think about the way that this sort of kind of shared space in the middle actually provides value to both sides. And we see examples in all of the things we've talked about where there's potential for a more coherent digital representation to encourage private sector participation and actually generate value for the private sector participants, and then at the same time create clear frameworks for the public sector to build both planning and regulatory applications on top of. And the next, and I think the really critical final part of this, is that we think that this is something that needs to be done in a way that's reusable. And the reason why is that these are increasingly kind of global digital spaces. In Europe, I mean, there's already this incredible conversation about kind of a single digital market that's occurring in Europe. We look at that at a global scale. There's just an enormous need to actually have consistency from a consumer experience and from the perspective of the technology companies that are building these global platforms. And that we actually have we really struggle on the government side right now to do that in a coherent way, because the jurisdictional boundaries kind of prevent us from thinking about the digital work that cities do or governments do in a coherent way across those boundaries. And we think that this sort of partnership model allows us to kind of bring some portability into this and start to see more consistent implementations in more places that make that sort of vision of a kind of coherent global digital environment more possible. So with that, I'll stop and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. One quick question. Yes. And there will be a microphone.
Yeah. I'm Krista Utalo-Jenks from the Finnish Ministry of Transport and Communications. I think that we're one of the first ones, if not the only ones at the moment, that are actually introducing new legislation related to data in our transport code project. So we're deregulating the market access quite heavily, but we're introducing data regulation that will mandate everybody to open certain essential sets of data, as well as to open the APIs for ticketing and payments with regards to single ticket or single trip to third parties. So I'd like to get your view, how or what type of role do you see for regulation with regards to data?
I think what you're describing there with the kind of exchanging existing regulatory frameworks for transparency or kind of openness on these digital platforms is exactly the right approach. So we see this is a kind of way to open up the market to innovators and actually give them clear signals about how they can come in and build technology, and also make sure that market remains competitive. And in return, you give them clearer and potentially more flexible regulatory environments to build on top of, and to have a signal that they're going to be able to operate in a way that is going to align with their business. That's actually the model I think that many governments should be aspiring to. And it's really great that you all are out there on the vanguard kind of pushing that, because I think once that's demonstrated, getting that to happen in more places and hopefully using consistent regulatory frameworks as well will really drive innovation in the industry, but also make sure that we end up with a stronger regulatory framework at the end.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you again for your presentation. And Kevin's presentation about the digital layer, the trip information layer, plays very well into the final presentation that we have from Madeline Xu. She's head of partnership at Where Is My Transport?
Thanks very much. All right. Thank you very much, Jakob, for the introduction. And like he said, actually, Kevin's presentation is the perfect presentation to come before ours. So thank you very much, Kevin. I'm Madeline Xu, the head of partnerships at Where Is My Transport. Where Is My Transport is a small but rapidly growing technology company. We have over 40 people, and most of us are based in Cape Town with a small office in London. And our vision is really one where we think that mobility in cities like Johannesburg, Accra, and Kampala should be as accessible and as sustainable as mobility in places like Leipzig or in Paris. So how do we do that? Well, we have to engage with the single largest transport operator on the continent. Whether you call them matatus, trotros, dala-dalas, or minibus taxis, this is the biggest transport operator in Africa and in many emerging regions. These are small vehicles. They are supposed to seat 14, but they often seat up to 30. They run on routes which may be kind of fixed, semi-fixed at the whim of the driver. They're demand-based. In some cities, you can get on and off wherever you want. In other cities, there's more sort of fixed stages or locations where you get on and off. But really, they can account for up to 80% of the trips that are taken in some of Africa's mid-sized cities. So there's, in many cases, not a lack of transport options, but there's a huge lack of transport information. This is a picture from our home city of Cape Town, and in Cape Town we have not only thousands of minibus taxis, we also have private buses, we have BRT, we have rail, we have cycling, we have all the modes that you could wish for. But again, we're rich in options, but we're incredibly poor in information. Whether that's information for the individual passenger trying to get somewhere, or whether that's information for the city trying to look at all these different modes and see how they fit together and how they should actually operate them together, this is really what we're lacking. So unsurprisingly, we believe that a city's mobility is as much about its information as it is about its infrastructure. And when Kevin was showing you those different layers of the physical infrastructure and the data layers that we put onto our cities, that's really what we're talking about here. That information flows through and around all of our infrastructure, and we need to find a way to actually tap into that so we can use our existing infrastructure better and plan for the future. So how do we go about creating this kind of sustainable mobility in cities or regions that are information poor? Well, you have to start with the data. Information is just data that's been made valuable to someone, that's been organized or analyzed or sorted in a way that actually answers a meaningful question for them. At Where Is My Transport, we accept and create and collect data in a huge variety of formats from a huge variety of sources, whether it's static, whether it's live, and that live data could come from a very expensive tracking device installed on a BRT, it could come from somebody's phone riding around in a matatu, it could come from anywhere, and also crowdsourced data. We can't be choosy about the types of data that we use because we work with operators who range from the most state-of-the-art high-speed rail in Johannesburg to an individual owner-operator who still keeps his schedule on a piece of paper that he chucks in the recycling every day. So there's a whole range of inputs that we have. But in a lot of cases, we have to go out and create the data ourselves, and so that's the kind of project I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on now. These images are from our project in Cape Town. where we actually rode every single minibus taxi route in the city ourselves. Our coordinators go into cities, they recruit local teams of people who are familiar with the system, so they train them in using our little mobile tools, and then they ride around on all of those vehicles and they trace all of those routes, and they start to get a sense of where the network goes. They interview the drivers, the touts, the managers, anyone who will speak to them to get a sense of the frequencies, the fare structures, how does it change on the weekends, how does it change at night, how it happens when it rains, all the different things that you need to know to get a comprehensive view of the way that most people are moving in the city. In Cape Town, we rode over 13,000 kilometers of routes, which turned out to be about 657 unique routes. And this map will show you that this is the most important transport mode in the city. There are so many regions that you could never serve that extensively with something like a BRT, especially at the cost that a BRT comes at. We spent about 3 weeks collecting this data, but we spent about 3 months refining, processing, and analyzing this data to actually clean it up a little bit so that we could understand. Every time the driver decides to take a detour to pick up his girlfriend, like that data is no longer useful to us, right? So there's a lot of back-end processing that goes into creating a usable data structure for this mode of transport. But we didn't stop at Cape Town. Since the end of last year, which was only a few months ago, we have mapped actually even more than are on this slide. We've mapped 7 cities in South Africa and Gaborone in Botswana. And you can see these projects range in size quite dramatically. We've got ones that only took a few days. We've got ones that took a few weeks. And the mother lode there is Johannesburg and Pretoria with over 57,000 kilometers of road that we rode on. And we don't even know exactly how many routes that is yet, but it's definitely more than 2,000. But that processing is still ongoing. So in the last 6 months, we've released its data slowly over our platform. But I promised that we would make information, not just data, right? We're all swimming in huge amounts of data. How do you actually make that meaningful and relevant to people? Well, you put it in a platform. So the Where is My Transport platform is an open platform for integrated public transport data in emerging cities, currently specifically in Africa and the Middle East. It's web-based, and it collects all those different data inputs that I mentioned earlier, and it turns it into information for people. Whether that information is how to get from A to B, whether that information is how one network interacts with another, whether that information is where do all the buses go, right? There's all different ways in which people query and use this data. Because it's centralized, it also enables operators to keep their passengers informed. They can push a message to their passengers on a whole bunch of different platforms, whether it's social media, SMS, or a digital sign, anything connected to the platform from one central place. And of course, cities then have a bird's eye view of the actual systems that are running in their cities. They can finally look at all these different networks together and start to make decisions and start to evaluate their current processes based on actual data. This is one example of journey planning, which is just one example of something that's made possible by the platform. It looks pretty standard for anyone who's used any kind of journey planning interface before, but the really exciting part is that this is the first time ever that we've integrated a formal, a BRT in pink, and an informal, that sort of pale color, which is a minibus taxi, in an emerging city. So this is someone who can take a journey from a minibus taxi that you hail by whistling on the side of the road to a state-of-the-art BRT that they can tap their smart card and ride, and it will have a fully kind of very modern experience there. And we've got walking links, estimated fare, the approximate time it will take. That's the kind of information that you can put together when you have this data. This is an internal journey planning tool, and I'll talk a little bit about it more in a second. But there are lots of other ways in which that information can be exposed to passengers, things like apps or things like maps. Sometimes people just really want to hold on to a piece of paper. So this was the first ever minibus taxi map of Cape Town. It only has 20% of those 657 routes I mentioned. Even with 20%, it's way too busy to really read. Our designers would never condone someone walking around with this huge piece of paper trying to figure out where to go. And this is really telling about how this rich and incredibly dynamic data set can really only be queried digitally. The way of printing it up on a piece of paper and sticking it to a post is not going to work for anybody. But it was a great way to start the conversation in the city and help people realize that this mode of transport is really, really crucial. So I mentioned that that tool, that journey planning tool, is an internal one. We don't release our own endpoints necessarily, apps or things like that, for specific consumers to use. And why not? Because we believe that public transport is an ecosystem. And an ecosystem isn't going to be served by one particular solution. It's going to be served by an ecosystem of solutions. So the beautiful thing about an open platform is that anybody can sign up to it, anybody can start to build on it, and since the end of August, we've had over 300 people sign up to start building things on our platform. They're all different kinds of things. An individual developer, like ones from the hackathon that we had in the picture below, who might build a tool to help students pick rental properties by looking at how much it will cost them to use public transport to get from the flat to university every day. Or a tool that allows people to report crimes on the train and find other people on the train who are also using an app so they can all stand together and they're less likely to be the victims of crime. Ranging all the way to companies that are building official apps that are commissioned by cities to help people find their way through the city for tourists or locals or anything like that. So there's a whole ecosystem of partners and other solutions that are being supported on our platform because it's open, and we take care of verifying the data, creating the data, and centralizing it for them, and then instilling the sort of innovative spirit that runs through our ecosystem. It's not possible without all of the partners, not just those 300 people who are building things, but also our delivery partners, our technology partners, our implementation partners. These are other companies that exist in the cities where we work, who we work with to provide additional value and information to the city through the tools and offerings that they already have. So this is a pretty complicated diagram about the way our platform turns data into information. So rather than actually studying this diagram, we're just going to watch this video.
Public transport. They think of buses, roads, and trains. They don't often think of the information it takes to make that transport accessible. Everyone needs information. A commuter finding the best way to work. Transport operators communicating with their passengers about their service. And city leaders growing opportunity for their citizens through accessible mobility. At Where is My Transport, when we think of what it takes to move a city, we think of information. The Where is My Transport platform turns data into the information we need. It supports data in any format for any mode. It enables operators to keep their passengers informed with real-time updates and alerts. And our reporting tools empower cities to make smart, data-driven decisions to optimize public transport. Our platform is open for anyone to build on. Create an app or tool that provides information to people when and where they need it. Born in South Africa, we understand that it's a challenge to move a city. We work with emerging cities like our own to build solutions that work for them. Empowering people everywhere to get where they want to go.
I think that was a little more fun than looking at the diagram. So as I mentioned, our data sets are always growing. Right now we have data for over 20 cities in Africa and the Middle East, and we have informally run data for the 8 cities in the southern part of Africa. We're always looking for more cities and partners to work with to expand this, and we're actually currently running some collection projects in a couple of other countries, so we'll soon be adding more dots to that map. But for us, it's really about enablement, about enabling the individual passenger to get from A to B using critical information that they need to make a decision, enabling the developers and companies that build on our platform to create the tools and interfaces that let those passengers go where they're going, and ultimately enabling cities to leverage the existing infrastructure they already have, the systems that have already naturally grown up around them through data-driven decisions, through really looking at what's going on and finding ways to optimize and manage those more effectively, and then use that information for their future planning. So when the Open Transport Partnership decides to expand that box to Africa, we would love to be a partner there as well. We think that openness is a crucial part of transport information and a crucial way forward into the future where all of these different companies, developers, partners, and actors are part of an ecosystem that's trying to get people where they want to go. That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madeline. We will just have time for a quick question. Down there.
Hello, I'm Karen Smith from Fin24, and I'm actually in Cape Town. So that's great news what you're doing. I just don't understand, how do you make it sustainable for yourself as a business?
Good question. So we're a startup. Obviously, our investors also like to know the answer to that question. Primarily, because our platform is open, when people sign up to use the platform, there's a certain threshold of usage that's free for them. And when their projects grow much larger, they become commercial, they start to make their own revenue from them, then we license the platform to them. So then we work with them to help them cover the cost of some of the platform and some of the usage. And some of those additional tools that were briefly mentioned in the video, communications tools, analytics tools, those sorts of things that allow a much closer deep dive into interrogating that data that we produce for cities, those are also licensed. But because it's open, we're very modular. If a city wants to use their own business insights tools or their own analytics tools, they can plug those into the platform and they can draw the data straight out that way. But there is a licensing structure and we run it as platform as a service.
Thank you very much again,
Thanks, Jakob.
Madeline. And I will ask you to take, please, a round of applause. And then I would like to ask Stefan, Oliver, and Kevin to join on the stage. And we have some 20 minutes for Q&A now, and I will immediately open up to see if there are any questions for the panel. Then, so here first.
Good morning, and thank you, everyone. A very interesting session. I just would like to ask about the drones specifically. Actually, I would just specify that in United Arab Emirates, there are regulations to stop drones due to the personal use. There was some abusement that would impact the flight traffic. And how can you control, or how can you ensure that such transport mode, which is, I would say, the drones themselves, I would consider it now a mode of transport for goods at least. How can we control it? We here assume in the videos and everything, we see only one drone flying, but we assume Mercedes and other companies will have thousands of drones flying around. How can you control such thing, and how the regulations and authorities would work this in a better way?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it would.
Excellent question. I mentioned in our presentation that we need certification of the vehicles and we need approval of the route planning. But of course, that in an environment where you're approving a single route or a small network is relatively easy. The big challenge will come indeed as the industry begins to scale and you have many operators. Now you put your finger on exactly the root of the problem, which is this huge expansion of the hobby drone industry. There are millions of these vehicles that can be bought for a few $100s. You're supposed to fly them within line of sight, and that should ensure that nothing untoward is being done with those vehicles. Unfortunately, people do stupid things, and that is the root of incident. That is the root of discomfort about the expansion also of the professional industry. And it is our interest to collaborate with the regulators to make sure that the vehicles that will be up in the air will be detecting each other and detecting manned aviation. Now, the issue of manned aviation can be easily solved because manned aviation should not be below 300 meters, and our vehicles typically are flying at around 100 to 110 meters. So there is clear segregation between manned aviation and unmanned aviation. But of course, as the industry grows, we will need to be able to detect each other. And besides the standardization of certification and approval via the civil aviation organizations, which is happening via a working group, another association has been set up, the Global UTM organization. And in the same way that air traffic management, ATM, is regulated and planned so that you have highways in the sky and aeroplanes going in one direction fly to the left, aeroplanes coming back fly to the right, so that you have clear segregation of vehicles and distances between them. The same will be done also for drones. This is in the process of development. And of course, companies like ours, our two companies, are fully supporting those initiatives and involved in them to make sure that we have a UTM, so an unmanned vehicle traffic management that will segregate the traffic flows.
Yes?
Kerstin Enochson from Volvo Cars. A question actually to Stefan and Madeleine. We've seen, well, minibuses and minivans. One is focusing on passenger transport, the other one is focusing on goods transportation. Isn't there any crossover? Potentially?
Sure. I mean, in the African context, there's a huge amount of crossover because those are often the only mode of getting things places. So a lot of those vans have a huge amount of goods piled on top. Sometimes the goods are alive, poor chickens. But they're sharing space with the passengers. In a long-term sense, in terms of the moving of freight and goods, I mean, I think that's probably an area in which the industry might look. The taxi industry is a pretty contentious one, but they are looking to innovate, they are looking to new ideas, so I'm sure that in the future some of them will start to also be more dedicated to freight, but probably not in the way that the Vision van is.
All right. Yeah, we already see these crossovers. When you look at our product portfolio, there is a mid-size van called the Vito, which shares some technology with the V-Class, and the Vito, you can buy it as a cargo van as well as a Vito Tourer, which is used for hotel shuttles and so on. And there's even a mixed tow where you have passenger transportation space as well as cargo space. So already we have that on offer.
We had one here.
Hi, Nicolas from CAF Development Bank of Latin America. I guess one of the key parts of being successful is to be open and to put as many people as you can under the same scope. And I was wondering if you have had any ideas on the progress of making the big players into opening their information and their APIs, and particularly referring to Uber. Have you had any regards on the progress on big players trying to join these initiatives?
Yeah, so on the open transport partnership side, what we've seen is a lot of willingness in markets that are more competitive to actually drive this. So in places where there's actually more than one company, there's actually a desire for this sort of openness, and really seeing it as a way to engage government in a collaborative way to kind of set the regulatory conversation in the right direction. In environments where it's less competitive, I think is actually there's kind of a winner-takes-all kind of mentality that's set into the industry, and I think that we're in a moment right now where a number of the companies, like Uber, has been in this place for a while. Kind of the sense that they're going to be a dominant player and they can kind of set the agenda from a data sharing standpoint. And I think this is actually one of the really fundamental problems we have to address first, is that it really, what we're talking about, it really does have to become a competitive market for this to work. And if we're creating a regulatory environment that actually does allow a winner-takes-all outcome, we're probably not going to see the data sharing outcomes that we want. But if we have the strength to really ensure that these transport infrastructure remain competitive, then the data as a competitive advantage and as a way to kind of block people from entering it, or kind of maintain that barrier for people to entering it, becomes less likely, because many people are going to have that data, and it's actually going to become a commodity at that point. And it's actually not something you can use as an advantage. If you've got 5 or 6 companies running a city, all 5 or 6 of those companies are probably going to have a decent view of what's actually going on, and they're probably not going to be able to use what they have uniquely to block other people from entering. Unfortunately, the story I think a lot of investors are being told right now by these companies is that one company is going to get an edge on that, and they're going to continue to use that edge. And I think that as the industry kind of levels off and we see competition emerge, or we encourage competition emerge through regulation, that's probably not going to be true.
One thing I might also add is that I think, as Kevin was saying, competition is crucial, but if some companies see that their competitors who are open are starting to succeed, if openness is an actual advantage that you can leverage as a company, that's also a really good way to start to incentivize other companies to try to gain that advantage by also opening up. So if, as a regulator or some other sort of government entity, you want to encourage openness, you should reward companies that act that way, because it will encourage the rest of them to also try to gain onto that reward.
One question here.
James Kang from the Global Green Growth Institute. I have a question to Madeleine. It's a very interesting idea to combine the formal transport, with the informal transport, especially in the countries in Africa. And I think that model could work also in the Southeast Asia, where there's a lot of informal transport mode. My question is, suppose the travel journey from your platform consists of the formal transport and the informal transport. So BRT, and then after that BRT, I get off, and then I need to take the informal transport. how it is guaranteed that the second leg of my journey is there instead of the driver, make a detour to pick up his girlfriend or something like that?
So in that case, you're right in saying that those aren't scheduled modes. So we can't tell you that this minibus will arrive at this exact moment unless there's a tracking device in it, in which case we could. But we actually deal with them as frequency bases. So what we do is we collect information about the frequency that they run, and then right now what we're doing is we're producing a probability model that sort of predicts where the vehicle is going to be. So instead of saying it will be here at 12:05, we'll say there'll probably be one within 5 minutes or within 7 minutes or something like that. Obviously, the more data we have about traffic, the more kind of live signal data we have from other vehicles on the road, the more accurate that estimation can be. But right now, it's just a frequency prediction because we can't tell you exactly where it is. We also can't tell you which vehicle it will be, of course, because there's a whole number of vehicles that are running on this route. And so if you start to think about things like vehicle identification, if you want people to be in particular ones, that's also an idea that you either need to let go of or we just need to sort of adapt for this other mode of transport.
I think I will take the opportunity then to ask you one question while there's a pause and people are thinking about their next question. The data sharing, access to data, we already discussed, this is an important issue. Data privacy and data security you have mentioned less. Do you think that people care about data privacy in 10 years' time? Some of us, we care today because we still have this thing, I want to hide where I am, but as you said, Kevin, they already know where you've been and how long you stayed there and where you're going next. So do you think in 10 years' time people care about privacy at all? Or will we get so much used to that we're just followed all the time?
I think it's a great question. So there's two sides to the privacy conversation. One is, I think if you look at just the actual sharing of an individual's data in the open, there's some limits on kind of where we're comfortable right now as a society with putting up my personal travel data in a way that anybody can have access to it. That sense that there's a lot of ways to start to aggregate that data to where the kind of value, the value of what insight it tells about the city, where that can be shared in a way that I'm very comfortable with and actually would like that to happen. Because I would benefit from that data being shared. And a lot of the companies right now that are collecting this data are kind of using that trade-off of benefit to the individual as a justification for why it's collected. So for example, Google and companies that collect just enormous sums of kind of personal data, one of the kind of guiding principles that they operate under is that when they collect that data and they use it for some interpretive use, that the individual that shared that data benefited in kind of some general way. And I think that's a really critical thing to make sure that what you're giving up for privacy, you're getting back something that offsets that. The other thing that's actually, I think it's more important than privacy in this conversation over the long term is actually ownership. And I think often we mix the privacy and the ownership conversations up. The reality is that their data privacy in the sense that I don't share my personal data, that no longer exists in the world we're in right now. If I have an iPhone, if I have an Android phone, I've let go of the notion that I actually have any sort of real sense of privacy. That data is being collected and stored by another party, and I really don't have any say over how that works. The question we have, and we're going to start to explore, and this is already happening in the EU, it'll happen in other parts of the world, is really who owns that data and what rights are kind of assigned to it, and when do I get a say in how those decisions are made. And that's something we're just at the very beginning of kind of navigating the regulatory frameworks around that.
So
I would just add to that a little bit. I think Kevin's completely right about this trade-off where people should receive benefit in exchange for their data, but I think the core of that is about knowledge or about consent. So many people don't know how much information their phone is collecting about them on behalf of Google, and Google will say, well, you get to have this really great targeted advertising in exchange, but you should decide that you want to have the targeted advertising and that it is of value to you so that it's okay with you to give up this data. And an example of this I'll use is something that's been piloted on a couple of different sort of transit-related apps and things like that, where people are asked to provide their location to the app, and they will ask them, like, are you waiting for this bus? And then when they get on the bus, they say, yes, I am. And in exchange, they get a live ETA for their for when their vehicle is arriving or the next vehicle. And in that way, they're contributing their location data, acting as a live tracker, so that other people waiting for the same bus further down the line are receiving ETAs. And it creates a sort of community of people like knowingly sharing their position data and knowingly showing a piece of information in exchange for information that's valuable to them and valuable to their sort of fellow travelers. This is happening on a small scale in a couple of places, but it's particularly effective in really cold places because people don't want to wait outside. They want to know exactly when the bus is coming, and they feel like sympathy for the other people who are also waiting out in the cold. And so that's like a small example of the way that people like their privacy doesn't really exist anymore, but they still have agency in choosing what they give their privacy for and what they get in exchange.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Matt Urata from the ITWF. Question to Madeleine. Do you collect data on road accidents to better service your users on the safety record of these operators?
So we personally don't collect information on accidents because in a lot of our cities we don't have continuous flows of data coming in all the time. But there is one application that exists in Nairobi that is basically like a social community for people who use the matatus. And there we've been in talks with them for a long time about potentially integrating with our platform. They ran a campaign where people tweeted or took pictures of accidents and then they geotagged those and used that to create a map of all these different accidents that were happening in the city. And that's a great example of an additional usage of data that we would in some way support. We would be part of that solution. But again, the ecosystem is coming up with all other uses for the platform that we wouldn't necessarily think of ourselves.
I just add on to the safety conversation. One of the things, this is an area of data that I think is actually going to be quite exciting to see what happens next few years with the ability to start to leverage acceleration data that's actually being captured by mobile phones. There's a number of companies in the US right now that are starting to collect pretty large-scale commercial fleet driver behavior data based on accelerometers and that are in the driver's pockets. This is actually something where you're not even having to install additional hardware. The driver's already got the phone, and then you can start to get a sense of kind of where unsafe behaviors are happening or where accidents are happening based on the kind of the collision occurring and being detected by the phone. That's something I think we've really not tapped yet from a safety management standpoint, and one of the areas that we're really excited about trying to figure out ways to incentivize that data to be shared with public sector that are interested in roadway safety. The area where it is being shared, I think this is one of the things that folks in the governance side should be watching, is the insurance industry right now is driving that conversation, is the most significant kind of data consumer. They're interested in kind of lowering the risk profile of drivers that they insure, and there's a lot of opportunities to partner with that industry.
We are about to round up now the discussion. Could I just ask each one of you to give me in less than a minute, what is the key challenge to unlock the full potential of the innovative work that you do in general or within your specific field? So Kevin, if you could start, just what is the key challenge you see to unlock the full potential of the innovative work that is done at the moment?
I think that the really critical challenge we're facing right now is getting back to a place where we're looking at the kind of public and private sectors working in collaboration and benefiting from what each other have to offer. And I think when we've kind of lost the way in understanding what role government plays and what role the private sector play in a lot of these sort of questions in transport, and we're kind of going through a process right now of reimagining that line. And there's a tremendous amount of benefit if we can come up with something that both sides see value in.
Oliver?
So our vehicles need sense and avoid technology in order to be able to detect other vehicles. And essentially we need a system of systems where each operator like ourselves that is operating flights fully autonomously, pre-planned, are able to pre-plan them in coordination with all of the other traffic that will be up in the air. So it's a typical example of the things that Madeleine and you were talking about earlier, which is under development, and we want the full support of regulators and industry to make that possible in the very near future.
Stefan?
Yeah, what I see is on the technology side, we are really progressing very well. Matternet as well as Mercedes-Benz vans. It's the same with what we see in business potential. I think the greatest challenge will be regulations, that we get really the regulations done. Everything else can be done by the computer scientists, by the engineers as myself. I'm an engineer. I'm not worried about the technology. It's more about the regulations that we get this in a timely manner done.
For us, I think it would actually be sort of related to what Kevin was said about working with the private and the public sectors together. For us, working with government is our ultimate goal. We are creating and collecting this information because we think it has incredible value for cities and we've created tools for them. And we also have cities who are interested in working with us. But we struggle a lot to start that process because of the way that procurement is set up. So many cities, especially in Africa, their procurement policies are not particularly flexible, not particularly scalable, and they don't accommodate for things like small pilot projects or things that start small and scale. We've often had partners say, like, we could do this project if it was only 10 times bigger and cost 10 times more. Well, that's not a reason to prefer to do a more expensive project. And so I think that one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of technology companies, especially really innovative young ones, who survive by working directly, by giving services and tools to the public sector, is because they can't survive the procurement cycles. They can't survive these really long procurement processes. And we've been fortunate enough to be able to do that so far, but that's definitely a challenge that we continue to face.
Madeleine, Stefan, Oliver, Kevin, thank you very much for your presentation. A big round of applause for them. Thank you. And if you want me to, there will be up here a schedule for what is coming up next. I guess there's a coffee outside, so enjoy the coffee till the next meeting you're going to participate in. Thank you very much for joining this. Thank you.